most likely very advanced being tried to communicate this to us in ancient time all the way to modern time through crop circles and other things, and that there's evidence of these beings being around for a very long time. So maybe they're waiting for us to kind of reach this level of knowledge, to reach this level of awareness, so that we can, enter or re-enter a larger community of the galaxy, maybe a larger community of our local universe even. There's evidence that this larger community has been around. Not just in ancient time, in modern time as well. I mean, we're talking thousands, millions of videos, people like astronauts that have come forward talking about seeing those things, and, airplane pilots, high-level military personnel, even high-level military personnel talking about these people, about all sorts of things that happen in nuclear facilities during the Cold War. Maybe the Cold War was cold, not because we're so wise and we didn't shoot at each other, but actually a lot of them have come forward, very, very entrusted people in our society, saying, actually, we pushed a button a bunch of times and UFOs would show up and turn everything off. Right? Like the Russians talked about it, the Americans are talking about it now. Many countries are releasing their UFO files. England, France, Belgium, Mexico, Brazil. The list is getting longer and longer. Spain. And, at this point, even the Vatican, okay? When you think of the Vatican, you don't think of an organization that's very forward, Like, in 1992, the Vatican excused Galileo. They're not, so progressive. Yet, the Vatican, a few years ago, like 2 years ago now, started to release statements from the head of astronomy at the Vatican. And the head of astronomy at the Vatican is very respected astronomer. Because the Vatican actually owns a lot of the largest telescopes on Earth. In fact, most of the telescopes that are observing the sun are owned by the Vatican. So, you gotta wonder why, right? Maybe the sun gods were called the sun gods because they used the sun to travel through the universe, to come here. You see, if everything is a singularity, and if you have a singularity at the center of your ship, then if you want to go from one singularity to another, you can use your local singularity, jump into your local singularity to travel the universe. In this case, you would go either to the center of the earth, which would connect with the center of the sun, which connects you with the center of the galaxy, which would connect you with the center of the sun where you're going, and out you come. So you would be coming right out of the sun. And that would give you the name sun gods. Interestingly, when you look in this ancient civilization, they talk about the sun as the doorway. And so this information from all of this together, and you know, if you're going through the sun, and by the way, there is video from NASA. I think recently, I was interviewed on Coast to Coast, for instance, a few months ago, because do you know Coast to Coast? Is a radio show, fairly famous radio show, and because there was all these videos came out of NASA showing these big ships, these big balls beside the sun. They were not small. These balls were the size of Jupiter, okay? Which is the largest planet in our solar system, okay? But you got to understand, if you have control over gravity, size is no longer an issue. You can make ships the size of planets. No problem. In fact, the singularity you would build to power a ship approximately the size of the Earth would be barely the size of a baseball. Right? That's all you would need. So, you know, I wanted to build one of those. Let's make one, you know. And I started to study, you know, like the dynamics of how I would have to build that. Obviously, I looked at natural systems, and you can see that the let's see, where's my laser? You can see they reproduce this dynamic of the double torus. Can I have the volume of my mic up a little bit? Thank you. I'm losing my voice. And so you can see, you know, those dynamics are seen in galaxies. I was saying as well that matter is produced at the center of galaxies. You know, this is actually what we see. We see these huge jets of matter particles being ejected from the center of galaxies. And the matter would be produced in the center of the galaxy because the massive black hole in the center, which my theory predicted 20 years ago, that we were going to find black holes at the center of all galaxies. And I was laughed at in physics conference. Well, now they found black holes at the center of all galaxies. And in that black hole, it's pushing, it's shearing, right? It's shearing the structure of space-time into smaller vortices we call atoms. And that's how atoms are produced, and then they come out. They're ejected at the poles. And depending on the angle on which they are ejected, depending on their magnetic moment on which they are ejected, they have different properties which produce the table of elements of our universe, all the elements. So you'd have certain elements more in the middle of the vortex and other elements more on the edge of the vortex. Well, there was this amazing illuminated genius in 1927 that figured this out. His name was Walter Russell. He's actually credited for discovering many of the elements in our table of elements. How did he do it? He went into a dark room for 32 days, told his wife, "Don't disturb me." I don't get away with that, you know. She's like, "Yeah, right. Remember you got 2 kids?" Yeah. Anyway, went in there, and in this room, he plotted a spiral. And in the spiral, he built the octaves of each of the elements. Right? And as he built the octaves of each of the elements, using musical notes, he realized that some of the notes were missing. Are you filming? You can't be filming. And when he actually got all of the notes worked out, he realized some of the note was missing. And so he said, "We're missing some of the elements." And that's how he discovered plutonium and thorium and deuterium and tritium. And he started to discover all these elements that had not been isolated. Actually, some of these elements were not found until 10 years later. But he could figure it out by plotting it on a spiral. Why? Because you're looking down the vortex. And if you got the octaves right, you're going to get the elements. Well, many people are aware of Walter Russell's work. And if you're interested, you should read one of his books. I think is a very good one. Is called Atomic Suicide by Walter Russell. It's called Atomic Suicide because many of the elements he found are radioactive elements that afterwards were used to start doing nuclear power plant. And he felt very bad about that. And he wanted to warn the world not to use them to make power. And, you know, and in this book, he describes many of the dynamics of the universe. He comes to conclude that the universe is a fundamental grid, right? Another one. And he doesn't say anything about the tetrahedron. In the beginning of the book is a preface written by his wife, Leo Russell. And in the preface, she talks about Walter Russell's relationship to Nikola Tesla. And you all know about Nikola Tesla? He's actually the main inventor of our modern society. He's invented most of the things we use. And Tesla was having a really hard time with society. So he told Russell, "You know what? You should bury all of your work into, a vault and get it shut down with orders to open it in 1,000 years. Because humanity is not ready." Well, his wife convinced him to write this book and put a lot of the information in there. But I think what he did is that he didn't say everything. He just encoded it in there. So he doesn't mention tetrahedrons, but in his modeling of the fundamental structure of space, right? The fundamental structure of the vacuum, he actually draws a little tetrahedron in the corner to let you know, maybe, put the tetrahedron in there, right? So here is his grid. And he describes it as the polarization action-reaction counter-up of 9 nevermore. So he describes each section as this, singularity where the tetrahedron intersect. But he doesn't say tetrahedron. Now, if you take his grid and you rotate the 64 tetrahedron so it's a cube, sure enough, you got exactly his grid. So the fact that he put that little thing in the corner was very important. So interestingly, I was thinking, okay, so we've got this double torus, we got this geometry of the vacuum. How are we going to do this in a technology? Well, if I took this geometry and I mapped it over structure, I could build a rib structure, I could build a coil, an electromagnetic coil that reproduce that fundamental dynamic of the vacuum, that reproduce that fundamental dynamic of the double torus. And I built it. So this is actually a physical model. You can see it's made out of 12 ribs. Remember the number 12? And each of these ribs is attached to a set of electronics that sends a pulse to it so that I can pulse them in sequence to produce rotation, to produce extremely fast rotation if I have to. And I can pulse the bottom ribs in one direction and the top ribs in the other. And in the middle is a container that is a crystal container that has gases in it. The gases are ionized so that they're magnetic. And as I pulse the ribs now, the gas will follow. So I can reproduce a little galaxy inside the crystals. What's in the middle of a galaxy? So as I made that calculation, I said, I have to spin this very fast to create that singularity. You can imagine that I have to spin things into the millions of RPM to get that type of coherency. It became clear to me very early that you couldn't spin a magnetic field, a physical object like a magnet, that fast. But just to give you an idea how close we are, the European Agency a few years ago took a superconductive magnet, right, a ceramic magnet, and spun it 5,000 RPM, and they noticed that objects around it start to lose weight. Very little amount of weight, but they were only spinning 5,000 RPM. You need millions of RPM, But they can't spin a superconductor that fast. But I can because I'm spinning plasma, which is what the universe does. it spins plasma. So, this is actually the coils being coiled. This technology is being patented now. It's a U.S., it's patent pending in the U.S. and it's been filed internationally. This is, this is in my earlier lab. This is in 1999. Most people don't know I do hardware. This is the coil being coiled. You see, we coiled inside the coil so that I can put current to the coils so that I get a magnetic field, and then I pulse the rib to rotate the field. And when I did that, I'm going to tell you the result in a little while, but here the field is active. There is no current going to the device, because when you start spinning the field, because you're spinning the structure of the vacuum, it has, it's a superconductor, it's a super fluid. When you start spinning it, it just spins. It spins for a very long time. You can see that picture is actually pretty blurry because it's hard to take a picture because the photons get spun. Now, when I was doing this, I wasn't sure, what I was doing, because my first experiment, I had very little funding. It was a small lab. We didn't have much staff. I had little funding. So, I did an experimental test on a device that I didn't think was going to do anything. And I, built little amplifiers to pulse the ribs that couldn't go very fast. The maximum speed I could get was about 6,000 RPM. But when I did it, it produced effects anyway, and I'll talk to you about the effects in a minute. But while I was doing these experiments, a few months before, the Institute, or the University of Science and Philosophy, which was the legacy of Walter Russell. Walter Russell had started that institute, and they had contacted me to be part of the science advisory board of that institute. And when I did this, I got involved with them, and I guess somebody pulled a file from the vault and gave it to me. And they didn't know I was doing experiments. Nobody's filming, right? And so, they didn't know I was doing experiments, but all of a sudden I received this file that was from Walter Russell in 1927. It was a file of blueprints of a device he built that nobody knows he built. To this day, I think I'm the only one that has ever had contact with this file since 1927 when it was built. And it showed a device that was very similar to what I had just built. Built by Walter Russell. Look at how close it is. And you can see the blueprint give good details on angles, very similar angles and so on. And the file came with a report from Westinghouse Laboratories from 1927, where the device was tested. And what they would do is they would put a little water in the container in the middle of the device with trace minerals. And when they would put power to the device, things would happen in which, in each case, the resulting gas was different. Meaning they were getting transmutation of elements. This is from an official report from Westinghouse, which was at the time military labs. And look at it. They actually called the device the transmutator. Transmutation of elements. In 1927, folks. So, what happened is that when I turned this thing on the first time, I didn't have the crystal that goes in the middle. I only had the coil, and I wanted to test the coil. So I plugged all the amplifiers, and I put power to the coils, and then started to pulse the ribs. And I got really cool effects, like you could take a little magnet in your hand and be 8 feet away from the device, and the magnet would pulse, like a heartbeat. And all sorts of cool stuff. But, nothing extraordinary. And then I lost funding while the crystal was being manufactured. Because you wouldn't believe how hard it is on this planet to fund a space drive. It's like you've been dropped off on this far planet in the corner of the galaxy here with no means, right? And you gotta find your way back home with the local, available material, right? And so, I lost funding, but luckily the crystal factory had just finished the crystal, and they sent me the crystal. So now I'm receiving the crystal just before I have to move from my lab, and I don't know where to put it. So I stuck it in the coils, in the middle, in the chamber that's there for the crystal. And I didn't put power back to the coil. I only powered the coil for 45 minutes, months before I received the crystal. And so I put the crystal in the coils, and I went to sleep that night. Can you guys turn those cameras off in the back, please? Thank you. And so I went to sleep that night, and I woke up in the middle of the night because there was this humming sound in my lab. It was going. When you realize that you have infinite potential within yourself, when you take the time every day, even if it's for 15 minutes, 10 minutes, to start your day by going within towards singularity, towards stillness, towards that point of infinite density that centers your existence. When you take that time, you're connecting with your essence, which is connected to the essence of all other things in the universe. You have that potential. You have that power. Use it. Become the linkage of all of the morphogenic field of the planet. Become one of the lights in the morphogenic field that is bringing more light and more light to the whole thing, become one of the butterfly that's flapping its wing to produce the hurricane of change over our planet. Take that time, because it's crucial at this time for you individually and for the planet as a whole. So thank you for participating today, and I hope we can be together again very soon. Until then, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you so much. It's great to be with you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. May the vacuum be with you.